If you ask a Georgia fan, like, what's the best Georgia football season of all time or your favorite one, I think that most people would answer you with, hey, that 2021 season, the history behind it, all that, and we'll dive into what that season meant. But I think that after this season, if Georgia accomplishes what the odds are saying that they can accomplish, what a lot of people think that they are capable of doing, and going on and winning a national championship this year, and it'd be the fourth one or the third one in 4 years, I think that people may look back on the 24 season and see it as an even greater feat than that 2021 season that saw all sorts of great things happen. And we'll break down all of that and compare the possibilities here. And right off the bat, it starts with the schedule for the Dogs, right? Why is there so much potential with this 2024 team? Because they're going to face a bunch of top 25 teams in Clemson, and I think Kentucky is probably going to be ranked in the top 25. Alabama, Texas, Ole Miss, Tennessee is probably going to be ranked in the top 25. They've got huge road games. You supplement that in between with playing solid football teams. They're not all just cupcakes, right? You get a Tennessee Tech, you get a UMass, but outside of that, Georgia's schedule is really, really tough. And along the way, I think that could. In 2021, Georgia didn't have to do that. And in 2022, Georgia didn't have to do that as much, right? Obviously, you kick off 2021 with that game against Clemson, and it was, look, don't get me wrong, it was a fun one, right? You win that 10-3, but you win the Arkansas game, you win the Auburn game, you win the Kentucky game, you go through that stretch where they dominate three ranked teams, but then they lose to Alabama in the SEC championship, right? They kind of round out the season against a Charleston Southern team that wasn't good, a Georgia Tech team that wasn't that good. You got UAB mixed in there. So you look at that and you say, okay, fine. That 2021 season, it was really good. They played some really good teams, but it's not going to match up to what could happen in the 2024 season if Georgia does go undefeated or even honestly just loses one game, right? I mean, is losing one game against one of these teams really that big of a deal? And another aspect of it is something that I already mentioned before, right? Georgia didn't go undefeated in 2021, right? They ended up going to the SEC championship and losing to Alabama. They then avenged that win against Alabama and beat the Tide, right, in the national championship in a moment that the Georgia fans will never forget, right? Like everyone's going to remember where they were when that Bryce Young threw that football. It wasn't a great ball, and Keely Ringo goes up and snags it, and he takes it back to the house and confirms that Georgia is beating Alabama for the national championship. That moment culminates that entire season and wraps it together. It's the bow on the Christmas present that's wrapped up. That was the bow, and it was a pretty big Christmas present for Georgia fans that saw them just obliterate the competition that season outside of that one day. I think that Georgia's the best team in the country heading into 2024. I think that they have to play some other teams that are in the top 10, maybe even in the top 5. I do think that Georgia most likely wins those games. I just think that they line up really well. Go through and hit on a couple of them real quick. But if they go undefeated or 16-0, right, the other aspect of it is it's going to be a 12-team playoff. There's going to be at least one additional playoff game than there was in the past, where you saw, hey, just the semifinal and then you go to the national championship. There's going to be more rounds, and it's going to be harder, and you're going to have to play more good teams to get to the national championship. You might see a Georgia face, they could rematch against an Ole Miss or play a really good team, like the second best team in the Big Ten or something in the second round. They can end up playing an Oregon or an Ohio State or whoever ends up coming out of that conference. I think that they will get at least 2 out of the Big Ten. Georgia could end up having to deal with one of those teams as well along the way to the national championship before they even get to the national championship game. So we're talking about an absolute juggernaut potentially of a football schedule when you rope in the playoffs and kind of assume that Georgia is going to make it pretty far in there. We're talking about there wouldn't be a season where Georgia just played all these big name schools. Albeit, they also got to go on the road at Kentucky. As much, it's not a home game, but it is neutral site against Atlanta. Obviously, they have the advantage of Mercedes-Benz Stadium against Clemson. At Kentucky and at Alabama, at Texas, at Ole Miss. This is a tough one. And if Carson Beck and crew can do this thing, not only is Georgia going to be, the number one team in the country throughout the season in the polls, Carson Beck can likely win a Heisman, right? That's in the cards for Georgia, and that's something he's projected to do. That's another aspect of this that could make it the greatest season ever for the Georgia Bulldogs. That's the potential. And, let's just take a time out from the conversation for a second to acknowledge Kirby hates this. If Kirby or one of his representatives is watching this video, this is poison. This is, or as Nick Saban would say, this is rat poison. This is not good for them to hear, whatever. This is, part of the job, and we're talking about things that are on the table. A year ago, everybody was talking about a three-peat. Kirby was talking about fighting complacency, but everybody else was talking about, hey, three-peat on the way, three-peat incoming, and they got pretty close. They didn't quite get to the end there. This is different, right? And now that's kind of out of the way. I think that was probably a real distractor, and maybe I think that's not the thing that really ultimately deterred Georgia from winning a national championship. But as much as he hated that conversation, he, I'm sure, would not like this conversation and talking about how, comparing seasons and everything like that. But this is where the fun is. And then you look at the 2022 season for Georgia. Not as jam-packed. You obliterate Oregon in that first game, great matchup. But then the schedule is easier than it is the year prior in 2021. Obviously, that game against number one ranked Tennessee in Athens was pretty special. I rewatched some of that game. The Ohio State game was obviously pretty special. The way that they finished against TCU is obviously pretty special. But none of it and because of recent national championships, right? Like, beating TCU was awesome for Georgia and everything, but I don't think that Georgia fans felt the exact same satisfaction as they did a year prior to beating Alabama and it being the first one in a long time. And, we'll never know exactly how the comparison of feelings would have been if they three-peated. Obviously, they're all extremely similar feelings. But then you look at what they can do in 2024 if they can, they've got a true Heisman candidate. They didn't really have that in 2021. They ended up having that with Stetson in 2022, even though winning it was unlikely for him. You get an SEC title. That's something that wouldn't happen in 2021. You can't replicate the story of Stetson Bennett. That is kind of the one piece in this argument where, I can't argue that they're going to find a player that has a more incredible story than what happened with Stetson throughout time and culminating into what happened in 2021. JT Daniels has the job, and then Stetson kind of takes it from him and runs away with it and helps Georgia win the national championship and makes huge plays in big moments. The dramatics of a season, and honestly, the dramatics of the entire back-to-back run is special. And there's a reason, the books that we made, Double Dogs, Dog Struction, there's a reason why people love that, because of how special things were the last couple of years. It's very fun to document something like that. But if Georgia can pull it off this year, it'd be more impressive. Maybe it wouldn't feel the same. Maybe people wouldn't consider it the greatest season ever just because of the feeling aspect of it. But from a accomplishment standpoint and an X's and O's and a numbers, if Georgia can go through, beat Clemson, Bama, Texas, Ole Miss, Tennessee, and just kind of run through this schedule, go on to win the national championship this season, maybe get some award winners, some All-Americans. They won't replicate the draft picks on defense, but they could have a lot of draft picks and talent. And I already compared that a couple of weeks ago. The potential for this team is high. And there's a lot of excitement. You should be, if you're a Georgia fan, you should be really excited about what the Dogs can accomplish this season. Ryan Cooley from Dog Post, thanks for watching. Newsletter, link down below.